Good morning.
Good morning.
Blessing of the Lord be upon you.
We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Thank you. We're studying the book of Revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ. And today we will be on lesson 10. Partway through a little section where we were dealing with the Caesars that deal with the church, the early church. And I've got to use my pad here because my mouse just doesn't want to work properly. So try to get this done correctly. Let's see. That's 43. I want to go back here. 240. So I want to start with Nero today. Last week we talked about Claudius, ended up with Claudius. We went through Tiberius, who really was the first one dealing with the church. Augustus Caesar, of course, was there when Christ was born. He's the one who demanded or commanded the taxation, the census that brought Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. He died in AD 14. And at that time, Tiberius becomes full emperor. He started as co-regent in AD 11. So in the 15th year, counting 11 as the first year, AD 25 is when you have John coming to preach according to Luke chapter 3. Is that where we looked at, Luke chapter 3? Let me go back one, just make sure. Yeah, Luke chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. And then, of course, we looked at John, what he was teaching. He was a forerunner. He was preparing for the Messiah to come. So he's the one who begins dealing with Jewish and Christian as the church relationships up to 37. That's with the establishment of the church, the beginning of the kingdom. Caligula was an evil man. He was hostile toward the Jews. In particular, ordered a statue of himself to be placed in the Temple of Jerusalem, which caused a lot of problems. There's no direct evidence that Caligula specifically targeted Christians, even though they didn't separate. They didn't recognize the difference between Christians and Jews at that time. So Christians did have some persecution under Caligula. Caligula mainly persecuted his own people, Romans. If you go back and look at the history of it, I don't know how much modern history, as it talks about Caligula, is true. But if it is, and some of the things that popular culture, our popular culture says about him, he was a very evil person. All right, then we go to Claudius. He deals more with the church and the aspect of the Jewish-Christian as that relationship starts to arise. And we mentioned in Acts chapter 17, verses 1 through 9 especially, the Jews are kicked out of Rome. Aquila and Priscilla have to leave also. We don't know if they were Christians at Rome or whether they were converted by Paul in Corinth. But we know that when Paul meets them, Acts 18, because they're tent makers, they start working together. and they become Christians, whether it was before or after, and of course they teach Apollos the way of God more appropriately. They teach him that the kingdom has come, not just preparing for it as John had taught. So that was about AD 49 when these things are happening. But the thing I wanted to point out, dealing with the Roman emperors, first of all, saying that there is another king, Jesus. The Romans didn't want anybody saying that they were king. Caesar appointed the kings. And if someone said they were king that Caesar didn't appoint, there's going to be trouble. They'd kill him. And remember that was the reasoning that Pilate used to crucify Jesus. The Jews said he's blaspheming. Pilate says, I don't care, that's your law. But he said he makes himself a king. Then Pilate had to do something, because then if Caesar hears that, he's going to be in trouble. So that's why he put the title on the cross, right? Jesus, King of the Jews. Here's why we're crucifying him, and don't you dare make yourself a king, anybody. Okay? So now we come to Nero, and this is really where we want to start today. The book of Acts records this lawfare persecution against Christians that festers into Nero's reign, with church leaders being martyred. Right? And what we learn about in the book of Acts is that Paul is arrested. He's arrested in Jerusalem at the temple, and because he's a Roman citizen, he can appeal to Caesar, and he's going to be taken to Rome to make his case before Caesar. And that Caesar is Nero. Nero's not necessarily as evil as Caligula, but he's a pretty bad dude, all right? And he doesn't want anybody being king but him, or whoever he makes king. And this is something that's pointed out basically by Mosheim. We'll get to that in just a moment. But his first imprisonment begins in AD 59 and lasts to AD 62. So he's going to be there essentially 4 years, 59, 60, 61, 62. Remember, that's how we count it, right? But he's waiting to be tried. Nero doesn't seem to be in any hurry. Why is that? They're waiting for the Jews who accused him in Jerusalem to come and make the charges. And they don't come. But then there's this other aspect of it. What about this king, this new king that you're preaching about and teaching about? Well, Paul's going to have to give a defense that he didn't do anything wrong down there. And by the way, this king that I'm preaching about, he really isn't any physical, material enemy of yours. What I preach and what I teach and what he taught, what Jesus taught was pay your taxes. Don't cause trouble. Respect the king. And that's what Paul was teaching in Paul's letters. If he's got a copy of them. And that's the reasoning that I have. You go back to Luke's writings in the book of Acts, in the Gospel according to Luke, and the book of Acts, which ends at Paul's first imprisonment. Those are like written as a defense of what Jesus taught and what Paul and the early church is teaching. And so the early church is no enemy of Rome. If Rome will do its role, in fact, Rome is there to do what? Destroy Jerusalem, destroy the temple, and the Jewish nation, if they will do their part, they'll last. But they're not going to do their part, and that's what the book of Revelation, a large part of the book of Revelation, is about. Okay? Question, Danny?
Wasn't this the imprisonment where Paul had a lot of liberty? He was able to go out and visit and
People could come and visit him.
right.
And he wrote letters from there to some of the congregations. They're called his prison epistles.
He had a real good relationship with the one jailer there. Is that the same?
Well, maybe there was only one guard who was watching
Yeah, one
him,
guard,
apparently.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. A lot of freedom, because Nero really didn't see him as a problem. But, you know, if you're going to put a man on trial and he's going to make his defense, hey, somebody's got to say, why is he here? What's going on? So, the Apostle Paul, a Roman citizen, was arrested in Jerusalem, AD 57. After appealing to Caesar, he was sent to Rome in AD 59. He's 2 years in prison, starting in Jerusalem, and then where? Caesarea, right? He was tried but not convicted and released after 2 years. That's in AD 62. Why was he released? He was necessarily proven to not be a threat to Nero. So the hypothesis here is Luke's documentation of the teaching of Jesus and the church regarding civil authority in the Gospel and Acts demonstrated that Christians were not in rebellion to Rome as the Judean Jews were. And of course, that's where the book of Acts ends. The Jews are starting to foment trouble. They don't like it because Caligula put up a statue in the temple. We talked about it. The Sadducean Jews, they didn't care too much, but the Pharisees, the Zealots, those type of people, that'd drive them crazy. So here's what Mosheim, who was a scholar, and he was kind of later, maybe, I don't know the direct dates, but listen to what he says, what he writes. And this I picked up from Beeson, who is one of the scholars that I did a lot of research on when I was writing my master's thesis, all right? Mosheim clearly points out, excuse me, that it was Nero who slew many Jews of Palestine, both Christian and Orthodox. Okay, stop there. Many Jews of Palestine, both Christian and Orthodox. So you see, at that point, they didn't make a distinction between Christian and Jew. If you were an ethnic Jew, you were a Jew, and you could get killed, even though you were a Christian and following Jesus. You follow? During his reign, which terminated in 68 AD, and that's quoting, I like AD 68, in order to exterminate David's line. Well, what's so expressive about David's line?
Jesus' lineage.
The kings of Judah, the kings of the Jews, were supposed to be from David's lineage, which means tribe of Judah. And that's why when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Joseph had to go there, because Joseph was of the tribe of Judah and of the family of David on both sides. Joseph, his adopted father, legal father, and Mary, his mother. That's why Herod tried to have Jesus killed when he was 2 years old. But Jesus wasn't in Bethlehem. He was in Nazareth, wasn't he? So he didn't get that accomplished. So Nero's trying to do the same thing that Herod was doing. But not about Jesus, about anybody that he could find who might say, hey, I've got a right to the throne of Judah. Follow me? That's his point. So Nero's decree was empire-wide and conclusive. Vespasian's reign repealed the decree, and the persecution against Christians ceased long before 93 AD. Now, why is that important? Because most scholars will say, well, John didn't write the book of Revelation until the 90s for Vespasian's reign. But see, that doesn't make sense, because the Great Tribulation took place back in the 60s. So this might explain why the Apostle Paul was detained for 2 years and then released by Nero. Nero would not be overly interested in a Benjaminite. He wasn't a Judean, and he wasn't from the line of David. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. He's not going to claim to be a king of the Jews, right? But he's no threat. Like Herod the Great, who slew the baby boys of Bethlehem, Nero would be focused on the Jews who would claim title to the throne. So why? Paul's released. Nobody comes from Jerusalem to say, he caused this uproar. He caused this riot in Jerusalem. He's preaching things, teaching things against the laws of Rome. Nobody did that. What was Caesar going to do? What was Nero going to do? He lets him go. When was that? AD 62. Follow me? Now, in a little while, I'm going to show you what Paul does. What we know he does and what we think he does. After the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, Nero intensified his persecution of Christians. This is from Lance's favorite website, Wikipedia. But it's okay. I've tested this out. This is okay. The Great Fire of Rome began on July 18th, 64 AD. It should be AD 64, but look. I know. And lasted for 6 days. This catastrophic event destroyed much of the city and had significant repercussions, or repercussions, however you want to pronounce it, it's all right for me, including the persecution of Christians by Emperor Nero. Well, why did he persecute Christians because of this fire? The fire began in the poorer district of Rome, an area that would be populated by Christians of that era. It is suggested that Nero had the fire set to clear way for a major building project. He wanted to build something big. So he set a fire, and the fire got out of control. Quickly raged out of control. In order to shift the blame from himself, Nero blamed the Christians and provided a great amount of humanitarian aid to survivors of the destruction. Okay, so to shift the blame from himself, Nero set the fire. No, it was those Christians, because you know what they teach? They teach that it's not going to be rain that destroys the world. They teach that, and yeah, they're going to destroy Rome, aren't they? Well, that's not, Rome's going to be destroyed, but it's not going to be Christians that destroy Rome. Who's going to destroy Rome? They're going to destroy themselves. It's going to fall apart from the inside. Okay? So he blames the Christians, starts persecuting Christians for starting a fire that they didn't start, but then what does he do? He provides a great amount of humanitarian aid to the survivors. Here you go. See how good I am and see how bad they are?
Typical politics.
Yeah. So, again, the teachings twisted just a little bit. What Christians believe, twisted a little bit, can cause a lot of trouble. Any questions on this? So what happens? Peter's martyrdom. And we know who we're talking about with Peter, right? The apostle who, basically, he was the leader of the 12. Tradition holds that Peter traveled to Rome and served the church there, the congregation there, AD 60 through 64. So he was there when Paul was in prison for 2 years. So they probably got to know one another pretty well at that time. Paul's released, but Peter's there, and he's preaching and teaching. And after the fire, Peter gets arrested by Nero and executed. Why? Because he's the leader of the Christians. This is where Rome really starts persecuting Christians. And it's apparent that his death, Peter's death, was an attempt to shift blame from Nero to Christians for the fire. Here's one of their leaders. Here's what they teach. We're going to, and listen, how did Romans do capital punishment for Jews? Crucifixion. All right, according to tradition, he was crucified upside down at his own request, feeling unworthy to die in the same manner as Jesus Christ. Upside down. That's tradition. Right? So that's AD 64. What's happening down in Jerusalem in AD 64? Remember when we talked about Josephus and how that the zealots and the Pharisees and such are stirring things really? That's when the first Jewish war begins down in Jerusalem. Does Nero recognize a difference really between Christians and Jews? Maybe not totally, but Peter's a good scapegoat for what's happened in Rome. That leads to Paul's second imprisonment and martyrdom. And now you're talking between AD 64 and AD 68. So you got a 4-year period. He's released in 64, but he's going to be martyred in 68. But what I want to do now, and we got the time, is look at his travels. Because the book of Acts ends at the end with his first imprisonment. But we know he's released. What happens then? What do we know from the Bible? What happens to Paul after that? Some people say we don't know anything about that. Yes, we do. This may be the best part of our lesson this morning.
Got a whole day. What people think.
Not Paul. We're talking about Paul.
Okay.
Talking about Paul. Talk about, and not only Paul, but remember what we talked about earlier, the tale of 3 cities? Jerusalem, Caesarea, I'm sorry, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Ephesus. Those are going to come into play again to a degree. But this is interesting. We know a lot about Paul after his first imprisonment, after the book of Acts ends. Believe me? Sure you do. You trust me, right? So, Paul's travels, and this isn't this is my research. I did this research, but this comes from a man by the name of Mark Copeland. Okay? Executable outlines. I love how he puts this together. All right? Paul's travels, AD 64 to AD 66. Conjectural. What's conjectural?
I feel like you guessed.
We don't know for sure. This is what he wanted to do.
It's like, it appears that,
Could be. Could be. This is what he wanted to do. Could have done. All right? I guess we need Bibles. Because I don't have these scriptures on here. If we want to go through them, and I think it's just a good example here of how when we study the Bible just a little bit deeper, we got the surface. Now let's go a little bit deeper. Right. Paul's conjectural travels. Paul certainly desired to go to Philippi. Look at Philippians chapter 1 and verse 26. I thought it was Philippians 1:26. So that your proud confidence in me may abound in Christ through my coming to you again. Philippians is one of the prison epistles, isn't it? He was writing this while he was in prison in Rome, the first imprisonment. And what does he want to do? He wants to come to them again. Look at chapter 2 and verse 24. And I trust in the Lord that I myself will also be coming shortly. Now, I don't want to jump ahead, but we don't have a scripture that says directly, Paul went to Philippi. But I'll explain that in a moment, okay? How about Colossae? Philemon, chapter 1 and verse 22. Yeah, there's only one chapter. He says, at the same time, also prepare me a lodging, for I hope that through your prayers I will be given to you. He says, prepare a place for me. Why?
coming to see.
I plan to come to see you. Again, we don't have evidence that he went to Colossae, but again, I'll explain that to you in just a moment. Or a few moments, okay? But again, look at verse 1. Paul, a prisoner of Christ Jesus, and Timothy, our brother. Well, where was Paul a prisoner where Timothy was also with him? That was in Rome, that first imprisonment. Laodicea and Hierapolis. Colossians chapter 2. Do we need to run through all of those? Do you want to run through all of those? It's up to you. Want to? Okay. Colossians chapter 2. Verse 1. I want you to know how great a struggle I have on your behalf, and for those who are at Laodicea, and for all those who have not personally seen my face. Okay? They haven't seen him, but chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. Epaphras, who is one of your number, a bondslave of Jesus Christ, sends you his greetings, also laboring earnestly for you in his prayers, that you may stand perfect and fully assured in all the will of God. For I testify for him that he has deep concern for you and for those of you are those who are in Laodicea and Hierapolis. That's what we were talking about, right? Okay. And now verses 15 and 16. Greet the brethren who are at Laodicea, also Nympha and the church that is in her house. When this letter is read among you, have it also read in the church of Laodiceans, and you, for your part, read my letter that is coming from Laodicea. Well, he's concerned with them, but Colossae, Laodicea, and Hierapolis, they're really close to one another, aren't they? They're close. That'd be like Borger, Pampa, and Spearman, maybe? You get the relationship there? Okay. One more. Romans chapter 15. Verse 24. Whenever I go to Spain, for I hope to see you in passing. This is talking to the church at Rome before his Roman imprisonment. All right? And to be helped on my way there by you when I have first enjoyed your company for a while. This is before he was arrested. He wanted to go to Rome. Verse 28. Therefore, when I have finished this and have put my seal on this fruit of theirs, I will go by way of you to Spain, Hispania. All right? Those are places he wanted to go. Are there any places that we know that he went after his first imprisonment, before his second imprisonment? You're going to say, Fred, tell us about those places, aren't you? Authentic travels. After he is released, you all see those passages? You get to do some reading now. Okay? After he's released from his first imprisonment, speculatively, conjecturally, he leaves there and he goes to Spain. We have no direct evidence that he went to Spain. That the traditions that say that he went to Spain, coming from the region of Spain, are all about 600 years later. And you know how the church developed a lot of traditions? And I say the apostate church made up a lot of stuff. That may be the case. But he could have gone to Spain and then come back. And when he come back, he went to, we know he went to Ephesus. How do we know that? 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 3. Who's got it?
As I urged you upon my departure from Macedonia, remain on in remain on at Ephesus so that you may instruct certain men not to teach strange doctrines.
Okay, so he's going to Macedonia. He's leaving Timothy in Ephesus, all right? Read chapter 3, verses 14 and 15.
I am writing these things to you, hoping to come to you before long. But in case I am delayed, I write so that you will know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and the support of the truth.
Okay, so he's released from prison. He may have gone to Spain, come back to Ephesus, leaves Timothy in Ephesus so he can go to Macedonia, right? And we've already looked at 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 3. But he says what? I want to come back to you. And that's down here in 2 Timothy. See that? All right. So Paul goes to Macedonia. What city's in Macedonia? That's pretty close. Philippi. Remember on the conjectural? He wanted to go to Philippi. Thessalonica, Philippi, Berea, before going down to Corinth on that, second missionary journey? So there you have the conjectural evidence kind of certified, should we say, authenticated. Okay, so he leaves Macedonia. Paul and Titus made a trip to Crete, which is an island. Goes down. How do we know that? Titus chapter 1, verse 5.
For this reason I left you in Crete, that you would set in order what remains and appoint leaders in every city as I directed you.
So he goes to the island of Crete, leaves Titus there. Titus, do some work. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go around to these churches that I established long ago. Make sure they got good elderships to lead them. By the way, here's how you know when someone's a good leader to be an elder. All right? So what does he do? He goes back up to Miletus. We'll get the map up in a moment and look at some of these. All right? Where is Miletus? It's just south of Ephesus. Remember when Paul's going back to Jerusalem before he's arrested, he doesn't want to go to Ephesus because he knows if he goes to Ephesus, he's going to be there for a while. So he goes to Miletus and calls for the elders at Ephesus to come down there and talk to him. That's Acts chapter 20. So he goes to Miletus, gets off the boat, 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 2, or verse 20, I'm sorry.
Erastus remained at Corinth, but Trophimus I left sick at Miletus.
Trophimus was sick at Miletus. Why didn't Paul just heal him? Paul's an apostle, had all the gifts. Why didn't he just heal him? Because those spiritual gifts were for something special. If they were to create faith in somebody, he already had faith. All right? So then, Paul returns to Ephesus. 2 Timothy 1, 16 and 18. You see how it's out of order? He's writing to Timothy.
The Lord grant mercy to the house of Onesiphorus, for he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my shame. But when he was in Rome, he eagerly searched for me and found me. The Lord grant to him and find mercy from the Lord on that day, and you know very well what services he rendered at Ephesus.
Onesiphorus, right? Okay. Who was Onesiphorus?
Was he a scribe? Did he scribe for
That was Philemon's servant. Where was Philemon at? That's a little tough. He was at Colossae. What's Colossae next to? Laodicea and Hierapolis. So if he goes to see Philemon and take Onesiphorus back with him to join those two together, bring the slave back to his master and say, hey, now treat him right, and maybe even give him his freedom. But do you think if he's at Colossae, he's going to go ahead and visit Laodicea and Hierapolis? But where is he? He's at Ephesus. And I think I have a note here. Paul returned to Ephesus, where he was served by Onesiphorus. I may have it on a later note. I think he's there for over a year. Who else is in Ephesus at that time? When we looked at the tale of three cities, we talked about Ephesus. Who else is there? Somebody wrote a couple books from there. John, the Apostle John, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, was supposed to be there with John. What did I tell you? Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. Antioch, the capital of Rome, essentially in Judea, couldn't be trusted. Ephesus is going to be the center of Christian thought and process, basically the center of the church, physical center of the church for nearly 200 years. This is where it's starting. Paul's going to be there. I'm thinking it's about 18 months. I could be wrong, but he's there for a good while. These other places, he's just passing through. But at Ephesus, he's there for a while. All right, he goes to Troas, which is just north of Ephesus, across from Philippi. See? 2 Timothy 4:13.
Bring the cloak that I left with Carpus and Troas when you come, and the books, especially the parchments.
Okay? But when he's writing 2 Timothy, he's in Rome in his second imprisonment. But he's been to Troas, and he's left stuff there. This is after he's left Ephesus. And to Corinth with Erastus, 2 Timothy 4:20.
Erastus remained at Corinth, but Trophimus I left sick at Miletus.
Okay? So Erastus, he leaves at Corinth, and he goes to Nicopolis. Titus chapter 3, verse 12.
When I send Artemis or Tychicus to you, make every effort to come to me at Nicopolis, for I have decided to spend the winter there.
Yeah. And then, when he gets to Nicopolis, he's arrested and sent to Rome for his second imprisonment. That's AD 66, I believe. So that's 2 years of travels there. And he spends most of it a lot of it in Ephesus. What time we got? Okay, I'm gonna have to get finished up here. Let me see what. Get over here. Okay, so Paul and Timothy went to Ephesus. He probably went to Spain. If he did, it was for a very short time. I'd have my doubts whether he went to Spain. But Rome's kind of over here, so he comes and he goes to Ephesus, right? And then he goes to Macedonia, which Philippi would be up in this region, right? And then he goes to Crete. So he'd get on a boat, sail down here to Crete, leaves Titus in Crete, and then he goes to Miletus, correct? Leaves Trophimus there sick. And then he goes to Ephesus, and he spends time in Ephesus. Probably from there also he goes to Colossae, to Laodicea, and to, what was that other one?
Which one? Start with an H.
I'll forget.
Hierapolis?
Yeah,
Hierapolis.
starts with an H.
Triopolis, is that?
Yeah.
Triopolis. Okay. I have to go to map. So he's at Ephesus for a while, he goes to Troas, right? And from Troas,
To Corinth.
maybe, yeah. We find him in Corinth, and then from Corinth is down right in this area. And then from there he goes to Nicopolis where he's arrested. But that's his trips up to 65, it says here. They give him 3 years, maybe 4 years if you count 62. Could he have gone to Spain? He could have. Be very quick, but he does spend time in Ephesus. Right? So we have a picture, and that's what the scriptures tell us about Paul's travels. You see how going just a little bit further, a little bit deeper in what the Bible's telling us, we gain a whole lot of information. So, Lord willing, this is where we will start next week with some details of Paul's death, Paul's martyrdom. Okay? We had the map up there. Kind of getting the idea of where it was. All right. Do you have questions? Does that kind of fill in some of the picture of what's going on? And you're going to go from Nero. Nero dies in 67. I forgot. But when Nero dies, suddenly there's okay, 68. There are 3 men who become Caesars. but it's about a year and a half. And they're taken out, boom, boom, boom. It's like a year and a half. And then Vespasian becomes the emperor. So we'll look at Paul's martyrdom, get on into Vespasian and Titus, the destruction of Jerusalem. That's where we're headed for. We good? All right. Thank you.